Welcome to part 4 of this series. We're going to be getting into a few other things about models today, including relationships, as well as the concept of an abstract model, which we'll see here right away. Thank you for getting this far in the series, and looking forward to hearing what you think. Now, what I like to do on most models, I find there's a lot of common things I end up putting in them. Things like a created at and updated at for like timestamp purposes, as well as a unique identifier that's separate from the ID. So what I usually like to do is actually create sort of like an abstract base model that essentially all my models will inherit, thus getting those default properties. This will help our code be a little more dry and be consistent between our models. So in order to do this, I am going to start a entirely new app inside this Django project. So we can just go Python manage.py start app, and then the name of the app. I'm going to call this common. Eventually we'll use this for quite a few purposes, things like validators in here, other utility functions, etc., etc. But for now, we're just going to create a model. And this is going to be called abstract model. Technically, you can call this whatever you want, but I think this makes sense. You can also call it like base model or something like that. And this will inherit models.model. Now inside here, we are going to have a UUID field as our first parameter. And we can use models.UUID field, which is just one of the default ones built into Django. And if you look at this, you'll see it's really just extending a field. And it sort of has some max length validators and a few different things to automatically make it work. But it's basically just a text field or a char field if you want to think of it that way. And in here, we're going to set a default. And the default we're going to use is an UUID. So we're actually going to import UUID, which is built into, I believe, Python itself. If we look at this, yep, it's just within Python. And what we want to do is UUID, and we want to use a UUID 4. Okay. Now, it's important here that I don't make the mistake, which I've done before, of actually calling this like this. If you do this, every time you essentially try and detect migrations, it's going to notice as a change, because it's going to be randomly generating a new UUID every time, and you're going to get all these unnecessary database migrations. So really, we just want to pass a reference to the function as its default, rather than actually executing it in the model. We're going to say this is unique, meaning there'll never be more than one with the same, at least on a per model basis. Editable, we can also set, and I want to do editable false because we don't want this to ever be changed. There's no reason to change it. And it will just potentially create issues for you if it does get changed. And we want to say that this is a DB index. And basically, database indexes are a way that the database will kind of optimize itself to be used for looking things up via this ID. And the point of this UUID is essentially to have a separate unique identifier from our normal just auto-incrementing integer ID field. And really the pros of that is, I'm sure you've been on sites before, maybe especially back in the day when you'd see, something like a blog, and it would be, something.com/post/1/2/3, essentially using the primary key as the identifier. And there's a few pitfalls of doing that. One of them is it kind of, gives a user an idea of the size of your database. If you came and you just saw posts or users, for instance, like /1/2, consistently, you would kind of think, oh, this site's not really that big. There's no one here. If there's only a few of these like small numbers, it kind of just makes it seem a little bit, less of a popular place to be, I guess. But I'd say more importantly, it kind of opens up the world to having people, build bots to crawl your site really easily, and not necessarily in a good way, right? You could easily just go through if you see the URL pattern where the number is just going up, you can just keep incrementing that number in the URL, and you'll just see things that maybe were like unlisted or not meant to be seen, unpublished, whatever, depending on your system settings. So doing a UUID, and this basically will generate a long string that's gonna be a bunch of random letters and numbers, like something kind of like this that I'm just typing out here. And, it's completely random. It's unguessable. There's a bajillion, gajillion, combinations of these things. So that's why we like to have this. And you'll see why, if it doesn't make sense yet, it probably will as we get further in this series. So we're going to have a UUID. We're also going to have something called created at, and it's going to be a models.datetime field. And this is not one we've talked about, but it's pretty straightforward. It's going to store a date and a time specifically. And for our created at, we want to actually set something. This is a special thing we can add on datetime fields, which is auto now add equals true. And what that means, when a new instance of this model is created, it will automatically set this to whatever the datetime is right now on the server. Similarly, we're going to have an updated at. And instead of auto now add, we're just going to do auto now. And that will happen every time a save happens. So this will be on the first save. Both will get set to the same time. But then if something changes in this model moving forward, this one will continue to be auto updated without having to write any business logic to do so. All right, so we have those. We're also going to set our meta info for this. And first of all, we're just going to say abstract equals true, and that just says that this model is an abstract model, meaning from Django's point of view, it's not going to actually generate a table for this. We're not actually going to have something in our database called abstract. It's something that our other models are going to essentially use. And then we can also set a default ordering, and because now we know we're always going to have created at in all of our models, we can do negative created at, which will basically just order things chronologically, newest things at the top. This can still be overridden on all your models, but it just kind of gives us a nice starting point. So let's save that. Now, what I'm going to do now, because essentially what we're going to be doing is, instead of using this on our track, extending just the Django model, we're going to end up doing this. So because this is a pretty rudimentary change, and frankly, this is something I would have done, in a general project even before starting any models, but I just didn't think it would make sense, to explain an abstract model before explaining what a model was. This is something you do earlier. So it is going to kind of create some issues with our database, because all of our database models are now going to have these new things. So what I'm going to do, just to be safe, is actually just do a full database wipe. And the best way to do that on SQLite is simply we just delete this file. And we go to our migrations folder, and any one that exists, so this one has one right here, we're just going to delete that as well. And I'll make sure there shouldn't be any in here, and there's not, so we're good. Now I'll go over to content, and instead of extending this, we're going to go from common.model. So what's cool with Django is we can import, as long as it's a an app in our in here, we can essentially import it by going like this, and then we can import abstract model. Then we're actually going to extend this instead of models.model on all of our models. We only have one right now, so that was pretty easy. Lastly, we did create a new app, and we did forget one little thing. We have to go into our settings, apps, and we're just going to import from content. Instead of content, we're going to do from common.apps, import common config. I'm going to put this one on top of here. It doesn't actually matter. I just kind of like to keep my apps sort of in a logical order. So you see I have my Django ones here. Then generally I would have any like third-party ones, in the next in line, and then our own apps. And to me, common just feels like something that should kind of be imported first. It's a common library, basically. It just feels right to be first. And it's actually also alphabetical order, so it kind of ticks two boxes in my book. Okay, so now we have this and this. Now we have to remake our migrations. So python manage.py make migrations. And there we go. Now, if we actually look at our track migration now, we're actually going to see, aside from the things we put in, like title and duration and stuff like that, we actually have that UUID now. We have the created at, we have the updated at, all that kind of stuff. So kind of just, got it by extending that class. And now we don't have to make a bunch of models with all these same, things that we like to have in all of them. Okay, so now that we have that, because we wiped our database, I am going to create super user again, because it no longer exists. And, sorry, we have to do one more thing. We actually have to run the migrations. So python manage.py migrate. Now we'll create super user, admin, and just a basic little development password here that's easy to type. And let's run our server. And we will get logged out, even though I'm in the admin here. If I try and go, it's going to get me to log in. That's because, we'd fully wiped our database. And let's try logging in. And now let's just make sure everything's working. Now, there will be some issues now because, watch, if I try and actually do this, actually, there might actually not be an issue. Let me preface it with this might actually be fine, but let's just see if we can make an issue happen. So I'm just gonna save and continue editing. Okay, it did actually work. But there are some things missing from our admin, right? That we might want. So let's go to our admin for content. And for instance, we probably want to have UUID displayed in these fields here. So let's do that, and we'll see what happens if I just do this. So we are going to get an error because we're trying to make a form field for something that's non-editable. If you remember, we made this an editable false. So in order to fix that in our admin, we just have to mark it as read only, just like we did for our ID. And now we'll actually see the UUID here, which is kind of cool. Another thing we might want is I'm actually going to add a whole another section here, and we'll just call it dates. And here we would have created at and updated at. Now, similarly, I'm probably going to get the same error because both created at and updated at are not editable fields, because we don't really want them to be. We don't want an admin to be able to come in and kind of like change when it was added. It was added when it was added. Now, in the real world, if you actually had to update something to be created at, you could use the Django shell to do that. There's ways around it, but we want to keep the admin pretty safe from doing weird things and accidentally kind of like modifying, this sort of like piece of history of when this was created. So we'll see, the created at and updated at. Now, if I was to change this, test 1, 2, 3, save and continue editing, you'll see my created at still stayed at 611, but updated at stayed at 613. So the update is going to keep changing every time something changes here, whether you do it through the admin or through your API or through the shell or through anything really. That's just happening really close to the database layer. All right, so that's our abstract model. Next, I want to create a few other models in our project now, and that way we can kind of talk about relationships between models. So we're going to start by creating an album. So we'll do album, and it's going to similarly inherit our abstract model right here. And an album, for instance, will have a name, maybe models.charfield. Name, does the album have a name or a title? I guess title kind of makes more sense here. And we have to give it a max length. So let's just do a max length of 125 again. And what else might it have? Might have cover art. So we'll do cover art. And this we can use, we'll be storing this as a URL. So we'll use a URL field. A URL field is basically just a char field, but it has some pre-made sort of things. Like it already has a max length default here of 200. And it also has some validation and stuff like that, so that it is like a valid URL. So we're going to just use that. Therefore, we don't have to actually pass max length in, which is nice. And then maybe we'll also have a release year. And we'll do this as a integer field, or in fact, we can actually do a positive integer field because there's no negative dates. I mean, I guess there kind of is, BC, but I don't think we're going to be tracking anything made that old. So we'll use a positive integer field. And okay, so let's also talk about blank and null. I know we've done it right here, but cover art, maybe some albums won't have it. So let's just do blank equals true, null equals true. All right, so we have our album. Now, a couple other things we might want to do here is give it its string interpretation. So in this case, we'll just send the title back. Then for our meta, we're just going to give this some presentation name here of album, and albums when it's plural. Okay, and while we're at it, we're going to make one more model. Nothing fancy here, so I'm just going to paste this one in just above it here. We'll call it artist. So it has a name and an avatar similar to our cover art here. We send back the name, and we have artists and artists. So 3 lovely models that we can work with now. Okay, so what I want to do now is actually allow these to be connected to each other. So for instance, a track will be part of an album, and an album will be part of an artist. So an artist can have many albums, and within each album, there could be many tracks. We can accomplish this with a foreign key relationship. So let's just start at the bottom here. And I'm going to do this right under title, because I think it's a good spot to put this. And we can actually do album equals models.foreign key. So this is another field type. And the first parameter that we need to pass in is album. Okay? So reference to this. Now, you sometimes will run into issues where, for instance, if you had the order of these, in this way, say album came after track, you actually see you get an error here. And that's because Python is read from top to bottom, and this doesn't exist in the context of here. The way you can get around that is you can actually pass a string into here using the app name.album, and it will kind of like lazy load and find it, and everything will work great. The advantage, though, of doing it, being able to actually just pass it sort of like natively, like this, is you'll get better IntelliSense in your code editor, because it will actually know it's an album, and it just works a lot better. But there are cases when you have to do that, or if there are models in a totally other app or a totally other file, you might have to do it that way too. So either's fine, but when you can do this, I suggest do it, because you'll get better IntelliSense usually. Okay, so we have album here. Now, we're going to require that tracks have an album. This can't be null, and that's just for the purpose of learning. You might be making an app where sometimes like a track is just like a single that's released outside of an album, and you might want it to be allowed null, in which case you can go null equals true and everything will be fine. Regardless, we always have to say with a foreign key how to handle deleting, meaning when this album that it's associated with is deleted, how do we handle that? Two common options. We can do onDelete equals models.setNull. And what that would do is it would set this field to null if this album got deleted. However, that won't work for our case because we're not allowing null here. We'd have a database issue if we did that. So the option I'm going to go for is Cascade. And Cascade's really cool because what will happen is if an album's deleted, all the tracks within it also get deleted from the database, which is good in certain instances. Sometimes it's not good. It really depends on what you're trying to build. But as far as I'm concerned for this tutorial and, trying to make this sort of data structure of these 3 levels of inheritance, I want, if I delete an album, all the tracks associated with it should be deleted so that we never have a null album here. So just keep that in mind, the 2 differences there. Okay, so we'll have that. Now I'm going to do something similar for album, where we want this associated with an artist. So here I would just do artist, and same kind of thing on delete. Now, something we can actually do is create what's called a related name. So what I can do here is go related name equals albums. And what this will mean is, from the perspective of an artist, if I have a specific artist, I can actually go through the ORM. I can actually say artist.albums, this name here, and it will return a list of all the albums that are associated with it. So that's a nice handy thing to do. So it's always nice to use related names. So we'll do something similar here. And in this case, we would do tracks. We want it to be kind of the same name as this because we would be going album.tracks. Okay. So let's just clean up our code a bit. I'm just going to get a couple trailing commas on these just to go like this so that my formatter will make it really pretty for us. All right, so now that we have these new models, in theory, we can create our migrations. However, we are going to run into an issue, and I'll show you what I mean. If we go python manage.py make migrations, because we have these null things, so album, it can't be null, we have the option to either manually create a one-off right now or quit this and actually define it in our models.py. And in some cases, option 1 would be fine. We could just set, album 1 is the default just for the migration purpose, but we don't have any albums yet. We haven't even made one. So this isn't really even possible. So what we're actually going to do is end up wiping our database again, like we did a few minutes ago. And this is, just a lesson in, architecting and stuff. Generally, if you're going to have this kind of hierarchy of things, it's good to sort of make sure you have all of them together at first before you generate your migration, or at least do them in order. If we would have done artists first and then made the migrations and then created albums, and then made the migrations. Like, it would have been totally fine. We could have set a default, no problems. But we do have that problem. And the reason it's happening is because we have data in our database, and it's essentially needs to be something. It can't be null. And because we don't have any albums, it's impossible. So we are going to, similar to what we did before, real quickly, I'm going to delete my DB SQLite. I'm going to also just delete the migration file we made here. Now, if we run python manage.py make migrations, we're not going to have that issue because there's no data in the database for it to conflict with and create this problem, and it actually set everything else up nicely for us. And now we'll run the migrate, and of course we're going to have to create our super user again. Quickly paused while I did that to not waste everyone's time, and we'll log back in again. There we go. And we have tracks here. Now we do have to add these other ones to our admin, right? So we'll go to our admin.py, and we're also going to import in album and artist. And I'm just going to copy this, and we'll just go down. Actually, we'll do it up here. We'll kind of keep it the same order as the model. So I think we had artist at the very top. So we'll just call this artist admin. And rather than configuring everything right now, I'm just going to simply write pass right here. This is just a thing we can do in Python because it's an indentation-based thing. We do need to have something on the next line for it to count as an indent. So pass is one of those options we can do. Another thing you can technically do is just 3 dots. That works as well, but I'm going to use pass. And we'll do the same for album. So album. Okay, so now if we come back here, we should see these in here. And let's actually go through and set this up. So we'll start with an artist because we'll need that. And let's just go test artist. And I won't worry about having an avatar. We'll just click save. Everything's good. Now, next I would create an album, but I want to show you something cool about the admin that we can do. Let's go right to creating a track. And I'll go add track, and we'll just call it test track. Oh, I realized one thing. Because we're configuring this one, we do need to actually add a couple things in here. So I'm going to put album right here, and we'll just refresh this. So we'll actually see, we have an album right there. So let's call this test track. Now, here's where I would select my album, but I don't have any. However, the Django admin lets you actually create it right in line here, opening a pop-up, and we can just call this test album. And it is associated with test artist, release year 2023, and no cover art right now. So there, it actually just made it. It set it right here, which is cool. And we'll say 30 seconds or whatever. And test 1, 2, 3, published, sure. And we'll just save that. So we actually have, an artist, an album, and a track all in one right here. All right, to wrap this up, I want to show one other kind of related field we can do. So we're going to go back to our models, and I'm going to do this one right at the very top here. And we're going to call this a tag. So we're going to allow tags to be associated. Now for this, because it's such a simple model, I'm not going to actually worry about inheriting the abstract model. I'm just going to use this because all this is really going to be is it's going to have a name value associated with it. And we're going to use models.char field. And in this case, it's going to have a max length, which we'll set in a minute, but I'll get it ready. I'll just say, 10 for now. We're going to change that. We also want the name to always be unique. For a tag, there's no reason to have more than one tag with the same value associated with it. And then we're also going to do some cool validation here. But let me just actually finish this up here. So the name of it from the admin's point of view and other places is going to be just whatever its name is, and we'll call it tag and tags. Okay, so I do want to show some cool couple things here, but first let's show how do we actually connect a tag to, for instance, a track. So let's do this down here, and we can actually do tags equal models.many to many field. So this is different than a foreign key because we actually want a track to potentially have 0, 1, or many tags. So it's a relationship where we need to kind of support many to many, meaning there can be many tracks that have many tags, and sometimes it's the same tag, sometimes it's different tags. They're completely like shared sort of things. There's lots of use cases for many to many. It could be like genres maybe, or whatever, but we're using tags for this example. Now in here, we first of all, similar to a foreign key, need to say what the model is. So we're going to use the tag model. And we can also give this a related name. So we'll call this tracks, similar to what we did there. So that way, on any given tag through the ORM, we can actually say, tag.tracks, and it will return us all the tracks that have a relationship with that particular tag. And we do want to say this can be blank. It can be blank because we want this to allow, some tracks won't have any tags. So we're going to do that. And then in a moment, we're going to make our migrations and stuff, but I want to do a little bit of cool validation stuff here while we're at it, because a tag is a good place to do it. So I'm actually going to create some sort of like class-based constants. And for that, I'll use uppercase because I'm thinking of it as a constant. Now in Python, there isn't really a concept of a constant as far as I'm aware. I guess like tuples could be an example of it, but generally the convention is uppercase means, this is something you don't ever change in your code. You kind of set it to a thing. And we're going to do 32 for this. Then we're going to, with tags, I want them to be they have to be, for my case, all lowercase letters and potentially numbers. We can have hyphens, we can have underscores, but we can't have a hyphen at the end or an underscore at the end or at the beginning. So this would kind of like, break words up and stuff like that. So we're going to create a regular expression for that. And what a regular expression is it's a very optimized way of doing like a check on a string to make sure it follows the rules. Now, this is something, I would never personally be able to type out by hand. But essentially, you can find things like this online, Google it, use ChatGPT, whatever. And what this is saying is it's lowercase letters, numbers, plus optionally these sort of things, but then has to still end in the letters and numbers. So that's the regular expression. If it doesn't make much sense, that's, that's not a problem. These are things that just, instead of you having to write a bunch of logic and if statements and stuff of like, okay, is it all lowercase? Is there numbers? Is there something in the middle, et cetera, et cetera? This just will do it in one quick line for us, and it's very, efficient. Now, we'll have that, and we're also going to create the validators for this. So I'm going to do name validators equal. And here we're going to actually import a couple things. So from Django.core.validators, we're going to import the max length validator. And we can just put that in here. And we have to set a max length. And we're going to use this right here. Then we're also going to use the regular expression validator, regex expression. And we're going to pass in the regex here. Okay, so I've set this stuff here. And then all we have to do is take a reference to this and go validators equal that right there. And this will do, basically at the low level, close to the database, there'll be this sort of like validation that Django is going to do that, ensures that things aren't strange. Okay, so now we can generate more migrations. So Python manage.py, make migrations. So this will create the model tag, and it added the field to tag. So if we actually look at that, we'll see there's a couple operations. First of all, it's creating a model, the tag model, just like we said it, ID, name, that sort of stuff. And then it's also doing a add field. So it's adding to the track model that tags with a many-to-many relationship. Okay, so now we'll actually migrate it because we just created the migration. Now we actually have to apply it to the database, and then we will run the server. We'll want to go back to our admin for tags, for tracks rather, and under extra, I'm going to put tags here. And we're also going to import this, import tag, and make our tag admin just so we can see them all. Okay, so I'll go back here. If we refresh, we actually see tags in here. Let's try creating a tag. So I'm just going to try, an uppercase. I'm going to put like a weird symbol, and I'm just going to go, save and continue editing. And I'll see it's invalid. But if I do something like test 1, 2, 3, it is a valid tag and it was created. So now we'll actually see it in our list of tags. And then back on tracks, if I pick one of my tracks, I'll actually see a list of all the tags here, and I can actually click one If there were multiple, I could click multiple, that kind of thing. Now this UX is not really the greatest thing for a many-to-many field, and in actually a video coming up very soon, we're going to take a look at a better way to, a better UI library for our admin that adds a lot of quality of life stuff, especially for dealing with like relationships. So I'll just save and continue editing, and yep, we're all good there. Okay, so that about wraps up this part of the video, this part of the series, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thanks.